Welcome to Sleep With Me, the space where the quiet grows deeper and shadows soften into story. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop your location and time in the comments below, and let's connect across the hours. Tonight's journey will carry us through 5 gentle horror tales, wrapped in stillness, told not to startle, but to settle. Breathe in, and let the hush of midnight take over. Let us begin with the story of the man who bought the wrong house. This is the story of Elijah Reed, a man who thought he had found a quiet home. What he found instead was a silence so thick it swallowed time. The house was hidden behind a thin forest of birch and cedar. Elijah found it listed late one night while scrolling aimlessly through local real estate listings. The internet was his only company in the small hours, when loneliness pressed against his ribs and made him ache. This house looked old, maybe too old, but something about the solitude it promised beckoned him. For sale by owner, needs work, sold as is, viewing optional. The details were scant, but the price clung to the end of the listing like a desperate plea. A stone house, secluded, away from prying eyes, far from noise, surrounded by woods, no neighbors, just trees. He bought it within hours. By the time Elijah reached the property, dusk had bled into the twilight sky. The road was gravel and long forgotten. The last time it had been graded was a mystery. Lost in the tangle of ancient trees, the landscape seemed unchanged in decades, maybe centuries. Leaves blanketed the path, and moss grew along the roof like a crown of silence. The house waited at the end of the drive, solid and stark, a sentinel in the gathering gloom. The key worked. The rusted lock gave way with a shriek, and the door creaked open as if to welcome him into a place where time had stopped. Elijah stepped across the threshold. He walked into a room that smelled of dust and disuse, of things packed away and lives lived elsewhere. The air inside was still, not stale, but untouched, as though no human had breathed in the stillness. Since God had built the house, he turned on all the overhead lights. Their hum did little to pierce the pervasive darkness that seemed to cling to the corners and seep out from the cracks in the baseboards. He noticed then that there was no furniture, just bare walls and a gaping void where a staircase should have been. On the far wall, an archway led to what looked like a kitchen, and opposite that, 2 doors stood side by side, marking an entrance to the night. In the corner, half hidden in the gloom, was a mirror framed by tarnished silver. He stared into its depths and saw only the dusty reflection of himself and the hint of something lurking behind him in the shadows. The flickering light danced with motes of dust suspended in the still air, and for a moment he thought he saw movement in the swirling particles. They seemed to gather and shift, coalescing into shapes that flickered in and out of view. As his eyes adjusted to the dim oil lamp lighting, he saw more clearly. One of the wall panels had fallen askew, revealing a gap behind it. It was just a coat hook, carved in the shape of a crow's claw. It hung crookedly from the wall, its shadow stretching long and distorted in the lamplight. That night, after he'd made his bed in the room that would have been the dining room, he heard a noise. He wasn't sure what it was or if he'd imagined it. The house was old, pipes creaked, floorboards sighed. Settling might be a more logical explanation than something fantastical. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled on a sweater and went to investigate. He found nothing amiss in the kitchen, nothing disturbed in the parlor. He returned to the dining room, climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and pushed open the first door. It was a bedroom, bare except for a heavy wooden chest in the corner and a 4-poster bed draped in cobwebs. He opened the 2nd door. This room was smaller, colder, darker, and as he stepped inside, he felt a sudden chill. The air in this room was different. It was quiet, not empty, but hushed, as if sound itself feared to tread where he now stood. He spun around, searching for a window, an air vent, anything to explain the sudden change in atmosphere, but found none. Panic tightened its icy grip on his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, and then he saw it. Behind a faded floral wallpaper, a section of wall slid effortlessly aside, revealing a glimpse of something beyond. The room was square, the size of a closet, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center, a single chair faced the far wall. There was no light switch. The door he had come through stood ajar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He stood at the doorway and listened. There was no sound, not even from the trees. It was as if the room had its own silence, separate from the world. Things that didn't stay put. The next day, he brought boxes and cleaning supplies, trying to make the house livable, trying to banish the oppressive quiet. Slowly, he unearthed remnants of past lives. A porcelain doll lay face down on the attic floor, its vacant eyes staring sightlessly into the dust motes dancing in the weak sunlight. In the kitchen, he found a stack of yellowed letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Their contents, indecipherable now, spoke of love and loss, laughter and longing, weaving a tapestry of memories that had once filled these very rooms. Then he began to notice small changes. The hallway mirror turned ever so slightly. The crow hook bent downward. Once he left the front door open while unloading groceries. When he came back, it was shut, locked from the inside. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. Panic welled up, choking him, making his skin crawl. He rattled the door, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent house. Finally, it swung inward, and he stumbled over the threshold, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no one else. Each day that followed was like the last, filled with the quiet hum of solitude, broken only by the scratching of his pencil as he drew pictures of the woods surrounding his new home. At night, he slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of whispering voices and shadowed figures that seemed to watch him from the edge of his vision. Then he began to dream of the chair. In his dreams, it beckoned to him, its silent summons echoing in the chambers of his mind. Each morning, he woke with a start, his sheets tangled around his legs, his heart hammering against his ribs. He avoided the quiet room. He didn't want to go in there. He knew instinctively that whatever slumbered in that silent place was best left undisturbed, but he checked on it every day. One morning, he dared to enter. He stood before the sliding panel, his hand hovering over the cool stone. With a deep breath, he pushed it aside and stepped inside. The chair was no longer facing the wall. It faced the door. Elijah didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He knew it hadn't moved on its own. He stood there for a long moment, the silence pressing against him, and then he left. Every morning he went in and the chair faced him. On the 30th night, he left without packing. He told no one. Left the house unlocked, left the groceries in the car, left the unfinished sketches on the table, left the chair to its silence. The house remains unsold. The listing has vanished. But sometimes, if you search long enough, in the small hours of the night, you'll find a house for $23,000. And a warning, faintly scratched into the listing's footer: don't turn the chair. The narrator fades gently into the background. Let the house fade now. Let its silence return to the dark woods where it belongs. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like, share, and subscribe for more content. It began in the village of Orensfield, a farming town where the winters came fast and the power often failed. In late October, as the days grew colder and shorter, the residents of Orensfield would watch their breath form in front of them and disappear. Then they'd turn to Oren home, hurrying behind frosted window panes and shutting doors against the wind. But there was one cottage at the edge of the tree line that always seemed lit, even when every other home on Meadow Lane lost power. The light from that one window never flickered. It drew their eyes like moths to a flame. What did it mean? Why did it glow? In truth, the residents had long grown accustomed to the cottage's glowing window, but its presence was a mystery nonetheless. Not because the light was magical, but because of the story it represented. It was a small lantern, suspended by a rusted chain just inside the glass. Its flame glowed a pale gold constant, unwavering. It offered warmth only to those outside, peering in from the cold, because for anyone who dared enter the cottage, the glow would disappear. There was no electricity to the lantern, no gas, no oil or candle wax. Yet it burned without fail every single night. Through blizzards and ice storms, through falling trees and power surges, it burned. And whatever magic sustained it, it seemed determined to burn forever. The cottage belonged to a woman named Marin. She'd lived there for nearly 70 years. Since she was a girl, she'd watched the seasons change from that same window. A quiet soul. She liked tending her garden and watching the wildlife. Her husband passed many years ago, leaving her alone with memories and the wind. She never spoke much, not since the day she stopped believing people would listen. Not after they told her she should let go of the past, move on, accept that her husband was gone. After all, how many more winters could one woman endure? What was another year in a life stretching to 70? But something kept her anchored to the past, something worth enduring. Every night before bed, Marin would take a small lantern and suspend it from the chain just inside the window. Then she'd light it, blow out any drafts, and lock the door. She'd heard the townspeople calling it a miracle, talking about how a flame could survive the coldest night or the worst storm. So she decided to put an end to their speculation. She invited them over for tea. They came hesitantly, bearing casseroles and shy smiles. She poured them hot tea and served them cake. And when the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, she led them to the window. The lantern glowed, casting dancing shadows on the wall. But the firelight offered no answers, only flickering silhouettes. "What does it mean?" someone asked. But Marin only smiled sadly. "Do you want an answer?" she asked, and they nodded eagerly. "Then look beyond the flame," she said, pointing to the mantel above the fireplace. There, suspended in the soot, was a faded photograph of a young couple holding hands, facing away from the camera, the wind whipping their hair. "He left in the storm," she once whispered to a child. "And I said I'd keep the light on so he could find the way back." Then, as the years turned seasons, the villagers began to forget the woman and her mysterious lantern. For what is a story if it isn't retold? But they knew when winter arrived, for snow would crunch beneath their feet and blanket the fields in white. And when the power lines fell victim to the first blizzard, they knew where to find light. It was one such night that the wind began to howl. The old oak groaned, branches scraping against the cottage roof. Fearful whispers echoed through the empty rooms as the storm raged on. Then suddenly, there was a crash. The next morning, the villagers saw no footprints leading to her home, no smoke from the chimney. Fear gripped their hearts. Was she all right? When they knocked on the door and received no answer, they used a spare key to let themselves in. They found Marin in her chair by the window, eyes closed, lantern still lit beside her. The wind continued to scream outside, but inside everything was silent. Her hand was curled around a doorknob, frozen in time. Had she locked herself in as the storm approached? Had she been trying to leave? They held a quiet burial, placing flowers beneath the old spruce, but no one removed the lantern, out of respect, out of fear. For weeks, the residents avoided the house. It was an eyesore. Everyone agreed, but no one wanted to be the first to take it down. Then one day, a family moved in. They brought paint and plywood, determined to hide the past behind drywall and fresh coats of stain. But when they tried to remove the lantern, the chain refused to break. They called a handyman who, after assessing the damage, suggested dismantling the entire fixture. Finally, free. The next morning, the residents watched as the man carried the lantern out into the snow. It was dark. They saw the flame sputter once, then die. Relief washed over them, quickly replaced by confusion. He returned, shaken, his face pale. "The light was still burning in my hands," he stammered, dropping the lantern back onto the porch. "It won't stop burning," he said, backing away. "I tried to smash it, but it just won't die." And sure enough, when they looked up, the lantern was glowing again, brighter than ever. From that day on, no one went near it. They boarded up the windows and sealed off the porch. The new family moved out, leaving the house vacant once more. Stories changed with each retelling, and this one was no exception. The residents claimed the lantern glowed brighter when storms approached, as if guiding someone home. Some even swore they could hear the porch creak on windless nights, as though someone had finally stepped upon it. Was it her husband come to collect his lantern now that she was gone? Some believed it was. Others say the lantern burned for all who were lost, that it was a beacon for those between worlds, always glowing, always waiting. Decades passed, and the legend only grew, keeping watch over Orensfield, a reminder that some flames refuse to be extinguished. This is the village where birds refused to sing. Tucked between two forgotten wars was a place the locals called Weatherby End. Once it was cheerful. Its gardens grew thick with elderflower, its trees tall and generous. The air thrummed with bees, and the sound of children playing hopscotch on the cracked pavement. The river lark ran clear and bright, slicing through the center like a silver thread. And above it all, there was always the song of birds. But one spring, something changed. The birds vanished. Now, this wasn't the kind of story that started with a bang. No huntsman's snares or hungry foxes. No poisonings or feuds with cats. The birds simply didn't return. One day they were there, filling the trees with their familiar trills. The next, unsettling silence. No chirps at dawn. No flutters in the trees. No feathers found in the paths. People noticed, of course, at first, with curiosity, then concern. At first, it seemed almost quaint, a momentary quirk in nature. Then, a little unnerving. When the days grew longer and warmer, the feeders remained full. The nests were undisturbed, untouched by predators. Even the pigeons that used to gather near the bakery roof to coo and jostle each other for scraps of bread stopped appearing. The sight of an empty roof triggered a fresh wave of unease. Thomas Barrow clutched his granddaughter's hand a little tighter as they hurried past. He couldn't remember a time when the roof had been so bare, when the sky had been so silent. His granddaughter, Maisie, was too young to remember. She only knew that the birds had vanished and the roof was bare. So she asked her grandpa, what did the trees do to the birds? Thomas didn't know the answer. No one did. Thomas was a practical man. He didn't indulge in fanciful theories. He looked for reasons. Had a new predator arrived? Had some disease swept through the trees? He questioned everyone, but no one knew. Mrs. Deloney, whose late husband used to take pigeons out of their loft and whistle until they flew back to him, shook her head slowly. Old man Chester, who'd rescued more than one fledgling from a cat's tooth, shrugged helplessly. Even the vicar, Father Benedict, who usually had an answer for everything, admitted he was baffled. Days turned into weeks, then months. The trees budded and blossomed. The river lark flowed steadily on. Life went on in Weatherby End, though not as merrily as before. A strange stillness hung over the village, as if it were holding its breath. And then one evening, the whispering began. It wasn't voices, exactly. There were no words, no discernible meaning. It was just a sound. A soft sound like a breeze curling in the wrong direction, rustling through dead leaves in winter, shaking an empty swing in the playground. It was subtle, easily dismissed as imagination, a figment of nerves frayed by months of silence. Then one day, someone heard it beneath the eaves of an empty house. Another day, someone else heard it near the doorframe. On a breezy afternoon, a visitor to Weatherby End heard it at the top of a chimney. People exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in unspoken question. Soon, whispers became gossip. No one could identify the sound, but many places in the village seemed to have it in common. All the houses that stood empty, all the doors that hadn't opened in weeks, all the chimneys that breathed cold drafts. It seemed to cling to the inanimate objects of the town like a fleeting shadow. The people of Weatherby End tried to ignore it, but in time, a strange rhythm emerged. Every morning, just after sunrise, as the first rays of sunlight touched the empty roofs, the sound would swell. For a moment, it seemed as if someone was trying to sing in the bird's place. Maisie would sit by the window of her house and listen intently, her small face creased in concentration. Sometimes her grandpa would join her, though he never admitted it. Sometimes, at first, It had been a source of dread, then morbid fascination, then a dull ache in the pit of his stomach. No one knew what to do. Some wanted to leave, and did. Others stayed, clinging to the hope that the birds would return and the singing would stop. And it was one of these steadfast souls, an elderly woman named Hessel, who eventually spoke up. Hessel was ancient. Her hair was white as snow, her eyes like polished amber. She walked slowly, leaning on a gnarled staff. She had lived in Weatherby, and all her life. She'd seen seasons turn, and people come and go. And now she was venturing into the woods at the edge of town. She didn't hurry. She listened intently, turning her head toward the source of the faintest sound. She was one of the few villagers who still ventured into the woods, who still sat by the riverbank, who still hummed a tune while weeding her garden. She claimed to know what the song was. One morning, she crossed the village green and entered the silent tea room, where a handful of villagers had gathered. They looked up as she approached. "What is the song?" someone finally asked. Hessel sat down slowly. "Not all things that fly have feathers," she said. "Some songs come from the ground, some from things older than trees, and sometimes, very rarely, a song waits for the birds to go before it speaks again." She paused, savoring the shocked silence that followed, then added quietly, "The birds will return, I think. But the song might stay." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The villagers murmured, exchanging uneasy glances. They didn't really want to believe her, but they couldn't help wondering. Weatherby End is mostly empty now. The cheerful colors of the houses seem muted, washed out by an unending gray sky. The river lark still flows on, but now it reflects little more than the leaden clouds above. Most of the villagers have gone, unable to bear the silence, the stillness, the waiting. Those who stayed behind watched their neighbors leave and gradually grew old themselves, their faces lined with worry and bewilderment. Only a handful remain. Old Man Chester sits by the window of his house, watching the road out of town. Mrs. Deloney tends her garden, her back bent with years and sadness. Thomas Barrow walks slowly through the silent streets, his gaze fixed on the pavement beneath his feet. And little Maisie listens for birdsong at the window, her eyes wide with patient hope. If you visit Weatherby End today, you'll find the river lark still flowing. You'll see the trees reaching for the sky. You'll hear the wind whispering through the branches. But if you listen long enough, if you close your eyes and hold your breath, you may hear it. Not a song, not quite a voice, but something remembering how to speak. In the small riverside town of Darnham, the clock tower had stood since the early 1800s. It was tall and pale and perfectly centered on the old brick building that housed the town's only general store. So perfectly centered, in fact, that locals often said, "When Darnham's bell tolls, the river listens." The tower's mechanism was hand-cranked, lovingly maintained by 3 generations of the Holtz family, until one day the clock simply, stopped. There was no warning, no ominous chime, just silence. When Thomas Holtz, the last of the keepers, climbed the ladder to the top of the tower to reset it, he found nothing wrong. The gears turned. The heavy pendulum, which had swung back and forth ever since he was a boy, continued its slow sway. There was nothing broken, nothing damaged, and yet there was something undeniably wrong. When he set the clock forward, the hands moved back. Not quickly, not forcefully, just backwards. Slowly, inexorably, the hands of the tower clock moved backwards. First 1 minute, then another, steadily reversing, refusing to move ahead. Before long, the townspeople began to notice other odd loops in their daily lives. For example, Mr. Williams, the owner of the general store, unlocked the same door at 6 a.m. on 3 mornings in a row, only to find the morning paper still dated Tuesday. Young Billy Plumley lost a tooth, then found it in his mouth again later that same day. And Mrs. Hawthorne woke up each night between 3 and 4 a.m., convinced she had the same dream, only to wake up the next night with the same bruises on her arm as before. And the bruises faded and returned again the next night, just as the clock hands ticked backwards in the tower. These strange occurrences unnerved the residents of Dartnham. Still, life went on. The the trains ran on time, children went to school, and dinner was served at the rectory at precisely 6 o'clock, or was it 5? Mayor Frederick Hollister, desperate to restore order to his town, ordered the clock stopped, so it couldn't be sabotaging their lives. But each time the clock was halted, the townspeople felt disoriented, tired, nauseous, slow. It restarted on its own within hours. Within days, Thomas Holtz, now pale and sleep-deprived, recorded a final note in the keeper's ledger. "It doesn't want us to move forward," he wrote. "It remembers the minutes we've forgotten." The tale of Darnham's clock has been passed down through generations of local storytellers, but nobody knows exactly when it began. Some say the clock has always counted backwards. Others say it changed sometime after the turn of the century. Regardless, travelers say if you stand beneath it at dusk, you'll feel something odd, like a breath against the skin, or a memory you haven't made yet. And if you stay too long, you may find the sun setting twice. What does this story mean to you? Perhaps it's a cautionary tale about ignoring the rhythms of the natural world. Maybe it's a reminder that some things are better left unexplained. Or maybe it's just a really good story. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Now, I told you this story without any music, but I bet you noticed that I used sound effects throughout, like the ticking of the clock or the turning of the page. Music can evoke all sorts of emotions, memories, and associations, but it can also be a useful tool for storytelling. There's been a huge decline in storytelling around the world, and one of the biggest reasons for that is the lack of storytellers. Storytelling is a dying art form, and without storytellers, stories die. That's why our mission at Nighttime Stories is to create and share amazing stories with as many people as possible. And we'd love for you to help us with that mission. If you enjoy our work and you want to support us so we can keep bringing these stories to more people, consider supporting us. Your support will help us grow our team, improve our stories, and reach even more listeners. Even a small amount makes a big difference and allows us to continue sharing our passion for storytelling with the world. Thanks for listening. And now it's time for one final story, one final step into sleep. The old woman looked out over the endless sea of fog that stretched as far as she could see. She'd been watching it for weeks now, this perpetual swirling gray that hid the path ahead and swallowed the horizon. Her granddaughter sat beside her, tracing patterns in the mist with a twig. "When will the fog lift?" the girl asked. "Will we ever see the sun again?" The old woman didn't answer right away. She knew that question. It came every day now. They had been walking for a long time, she thought, longer than she could remember. It must have been years since they'd left the village. She remembered the day they left. They were running, she and her husband and daughter, running from the men with the carts and the dogs and the knives, running from the burning village, running from the screams. She looked down at her granddaughter, her precious little Lily. "Where did you learn to walk?" she wondered. "You were barely 2 when we left our home. How old are you now? 7, 8. Time had become meaningless here in the fog. All she knew was that her granddaughter needed her. She was all she had left. "Will we ever see the sun again?" Lily asked, her voice echoing oddly in the mist. The old woman sighed. The sun didn't shine here. That much she knew. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way to bring light into their lives. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old, battered lantern. It was all that remained of the life she once had. She remembered the day her husband, bless his soul, had given it to her. They were celebrating their 10th anniversary, she thought. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of love. He'd bought it from a traveling merchant, a magical lantern that never ran out of oil. It seemed foolish then, but what choice did they have? After the war, who would want to trade for a lantern? She looked at the flickering flame and smiled. This wasn't the sun, of course, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The old woman held the lantern high and walked forward into the fog. Her granddaughter skipped ahead, then turned back to make sure her grandmother was following. After a while, the fog began to thin. The path ahead became clearer, and the faint outline of a house appeared in the distance. Hope surged through the old woman. Maybe they wouldn't be lost forever. Maybe they would find their way back to the world of the living. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the house and whatever lay beyond. But as they walked, the fog began to thicken again, swirling and eddying around their feet. The path disappeared, and the house vanished from sight. The old woman stumbled, her lantern falling from her grasp. "Lily," she cried, rushing to pick it up. But her granddaughter was gone. Panic seized her. She called out for Lily, her voice echoing in the mist, but there was no reply. Then she heard a twig snap. She whirled around, clutching the lantern, and saw a dark figure emerging from the fog. The old woman stepped back, fear constricting her throat. Who was it? Was it one of the men from the village? Had they come to finish what they started? As the figure drew closer, she could see that it was a young girl. She wore a tattered dress, and her hair was matted and dirty. But it was her eyes that truly terrified the old woman. They were empty, soulless pits of darkness. "Lily," the old woman whispered, hope flickering in her chest. But the girl shook her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "I am not your granddaughter. I am the fog." The old woman gasped as the girl took a step forward. She could see now that the mist swirled around the girl in a constant stream, flowing in and out of her ragged clothes, tendrils of fog reaching out to touch the old woman's face. "Run," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Run while you still can. Don't look back, don't speak, just run." The old woman hesitated, torn between her fear of the creature before her and her love for her missing granddaughter. Then she turned and fled, stumbling through the fog, calling out for Lily. The creature watched her go, a sad smile on her face. "Goodbye," she whispered, and the fog closed over her like a shroud. The old woman ran for what felt like hours, the creature's words echoing in her ears. "Run while you still can. Don't look back, don't speak, just run." She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The fog was thick and cold, seeping into her bones and chilling her to the core. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Not until she found Lily. Not until she brought her granddaughter home. Suddenly, the fog began to thin. The path ahead cleared, and the old woman could see a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through her. Maybe she was almost there. Maybe she would find Lily soon. She quickened her pace, stumbling over roots and rocks, pushing aside branches that reached out to grab her. And then she saw it. A cottage nestled in the clearing. Smoke curling from its chimney, a warm, inviting glow spilling from its windows. The old woman hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Should she go in? Was it safe? She didn't know. She didn't care. She had to get out of the fog. She had to find Lily. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the cottage, each step bringing her closer to the light, closer to the promise of warmth and safety. As she neared the house, she could hear voices, laughter, the crackling of a fire. She could smell baking bread and roasting meat. It was a feast. She knocked on the door, her hand trembling. In a moment, the door opened, and a kind-faced woman stood before her. "Can I help you?" she asked. The old woman hesitated. She didn't know this woman. She didn't know anyone here, but she had to ask. "Have you seen my granddaughter? She's about this tall," she said, holding out her arms, "and she has beautiful red hair." The woman's face softened. Come in," she said, stepping aside to let the old woman enter. "I think we might be able to help you." The old woman stepped inside and gasped. There, sitting around a table piled high with food, were all the villagers she'd known so well before the war. They were laughing and talking, eating and drinking. They were alive. And there, in the center of it all, was her daughter, her beautiful Lily. The old woman's heart soared. She rushed forward and swept her daughter into a tight embrace. "Mama," Lily cried, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "I'm so glad you found me." The old woman held her close, tears streaming down her face. She was so happy to have her daughter back. She was so grateful to be among friends. Then she turned to the woman who had greeted her at the door. "Thank you," she said. "How can I ever repay you?" The woman smiled. "You don't need to repay us," she said. "We're just happy to have you and Lily home." The old woman looked around at the smiling faces, at the overflowing table, at the warm fire. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Finally, she was home. As the villagers ate and drank and told stories, the old woman leaned against her husband's shoulder and closed her eyes. She was safe now. She was loved. She was home. And that was all that mattered.